Welcome again. We are looking at Homer's Odyssey, and we're going to, I spent a great deal of time last time, too much time, looking at the very beginning of the epic, but I really wanted to emphasize the significance of the beginning of it, which was beginning an epic story which has broad educational significance. It's used, Homer was called the educator for all the Greeks. People read Homer, actually they heard him recounted in public fora, and they regarded Homer as authoritative in all areas of life. He taught wisdom and virtue, which is basically the sum and substance of historic education, is training in wisdom and virtue. And that is the view of the Greeks and the Romans and pretty much every civilization that's ever lived up until our own, which does not believe in wisdom or virtue, has dispensed with both. And I just wanted to briefly avert your attention to Psalm 1, which is the beginning of the whole Psalter, obviously, but is what theologians will call a wisdom psalm. And it recommends I'm not going to read it just for the sake of time, but you can see it behind me. It recommends two courses of life. It doesn't recommend them. It speaks of two courses of life, and it recommends one, the life of righteousness, as opposed to the life of wickedness. In other words, a life of moral conduct as opposed to immoral conduct. And in the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, we find exactly the same thing being recommended to us. And I just want to make it clear that that is what's going on in the Odyssey. It's not just a story full of fantastic beings that will be replicated by subsequent generations and picked up in popular fiction, although we'll find that many of the creatures in Homer's underworld we'll find in later works, like in Harry Potter. We'll find fictional beasts mentioned there, or C.S. Lewis will allude to them. And many other fiction writers they'll become the subject of paintings and music and theater, etc. So Homer's Odyssey becomes a foundational work for all sorts of other works. But it's not just the stories, it's what the stories represent. And what the stories represent is how to live a moral life, how to be wise. And that's why the figure of Athena walks onto the stage of the epic here, disguised as Mentes, or as I said to you last time, the way we commonly represent this when we're not being too faithful to the Greek as he is here, mentor. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, in the guise of an old wise man, speaks to young Telemachus, who has grown up without a father figure to teach him how to act and to teach him the ways of wisdom in his life. And what she's demonstrating to us is the necessity for a young man, and I say young man, including women, because the figures of wisdom are not reduced to the men here. We have Penelope, who's a figure of wisdom herself, and of course the goddess of wisdom herself is personified in female form here. But how to live a wise life and how to live a virtuous life. And the scene in which we are thrust right in the beginning is a crisis. As I say, the great Odysseus has not returned home from the Trojan War. He is stranded. We don't even know where he is at this point. It's briefly alluded to, but we will not meet him until the 5th book. We'll get to that very shortly here. And in the interim, the man who stood up for wisdom, because Athena loves Odysseus because he loves wisdom, and stood for a moral life, has been treated abominably. He's been abandoned. And the consequence of that is it looks like justice does not matter to the gods, that wisdom is not prized. Because if the man who's most renowned for these things is treated as abominably as Odysseus is being, then why would anyone follow a life of wisdom and virtue when what we're going to see is that suffering will come with it, at the very least? Odysseus is renowned for not just his wisdom and his virtue, but his suffering. And in fact, those three things are connected: his wisdom, his virtue, and his endurance of suffering for the sake of a greater good. All those things are being presented to us very early on. I just mention that because I think we can easily overlook that there's a big picture going on here. There's a reason why Homer was regarded as the teacher of all the Greeks. Now we're going to see in a few weeks that Plato and the philosophers will critique the epic tradition for their portrait of the gods. Say they're immoral. They do unjust things. They act like really bad people. How can they be the gods whom we worship? So they dispute the theology of Homer. And I think we in general will be sympathetic to that because, among other things, we'll see that the gods lie all the time. And they recommend lying. And even from a non-Christian point of view, Plato is going to find that lying is reprehensible. We ought to be truthful. We ought to regard the truth, revere the truth, and tell the truth. And his great hero, Socrates, will die because he will not renounce what he believes to be the truth about the nature of truth, among other things, against the sophists. He's willing to die for the truth. So the portrait of the virtuous man that we have in Homer, or in Odysseus, who regularly lies and deceives and represents wisdom, Plato is going to have some issues with that. And we, in general, are sympathetic to Plato's critique of that. But that does not mean that what is not at stake is whether wisdom and virtue are what is the essence of a good human life. And you're all first here, and this is a question that I want you to ask at this stage in your studies is, what does it mean to be a good human being, a wise human being, a virtuous human being, and how can I start on that path and stick to the path? Because those are the, as I say in Psalm 1, that is exactly what is being commended to us. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. Strong statement with which the whole book of Psalms, which were sung in the Hebrew temple, and were the songs of praise for God's people that they meditated on, and the law of the Lord and the wisdom. That's the same emphasis in the Greeks. They're going to disagree on significant things. As we know, Paul will question the Greeks. What the Greeks regard as wisdom is foolishness, and what they regard as foolishness is wisdom, and he's speaking there of the cross. And that will be a significant difference between the two cultures, and we'll get to that in a minute. But they both prize wisdom, and they both prize virtue, and every traditional religion prizes wisdom and virtue. And we do not live in a traditional age. We prize neither wisdom nor virtue. So when we come to this text, one of the things I want you to be doing is to be thinking and reflecting on your own life and the age in which you live, and whether what is taught as living a good life is actually a good life. Whether they have anything to say about the nature of the gods, and whether they have anything to say about human nature. And on what authority do they make these claims? Is it just an appeal to authority? Like the experts say this. But what do the experts appeal to when they make their decisions? Do they appeal to their understanding of who God is? And who they are as human beings? Do they even have these discussions? They don't. To answer my rhetorical question, they don't actually raise these. So we live in a very uneducated age. And my hope for this course is it will introduce you to the topic of living a good life and make you question whether you're on that path to a good life, and if not, then how can you get on that path? Because that's a good way to begin. So I like that, and that's why I do Homer's Odyssey rather than the Iliad. As much as I revere the Iliad, I think it's a great work. But this one deals with wisdom, and that seems really important to me. So as I say, Athena enters the stage here in the guise of mentor and speaks as an old man into the life of this young man, Telemachus, who's been grown up for 20 years, hearing about his legendary father, whom he has never clapped eyes upon, and even resembles in his appearance, and yet that fills him with very complicated feelings. Because this is his father. And so there's a pride that comes with that, but then he's never seen him, and so there's a great deal of resentment. And he himself although he looks like his father, doesn't act like his father. He's not brave. He's cowering at home. There are suitors in his house. He can't do anything about it. He wishes dad would come home and deal with the problem. Remember, he's a 20-year-old man. At the age of 20, men in Homer's day would be out in the theaters of war and acting with responsibility. And he's not like that. He is not yet launched. And it's hard to be critiquing him too much. Like he's sitting in his mom's basement in his underpants playing video games, whatever. I mean, obviously none of those things. But the portrait is, here's a young man who has all the potential in the world, but he has not realized that at all. And he feels humiliated by it. And the fact that his father is so great makes him feel that much worse about himself. So Athena, the wise old man, comes in and encourages him to get out of the house. Get out of the house and go on a voyage. Just like his father, the wanderer, he's going to go on a voyage and he's going to see something of the world. And chiefly what she sends him to do is to find out news about Odysseus, where he is and what he's doing and so forth. Now, when she does this, she knows full well, as we do, that he's not going to find Odysseus. Because she knows where he is. She knows he's with the nymph, Calypso. And she's not sending him to that place. She's sending him to Odysseus' old war companion in Sparta. Go ask Menelaus if he knows, and go to Nestor, the old man of the sea, and get information from them. And as he does this, he hears from eyewitnesses what his father was really like. And these men who were side by side with him in the theater of battle will tell him stories that are not just legends, they're realistic accounts. They'll make his father, into a flesh and blood man and not just a legend that he cannot possibly live up to, because nobody can live up to be a legendary character. Nobody. It's too much. The aim of a good life is to be a good man. You don't have to be a great man. Try being a good man and you might be a great man. But first just try the lower aim. Be good. And they reduce him in these tales to a man that they loved and revered and miss. And so there's a little bit of a sharing in the suffering there that comes from these tales. Any comments or questions before I skip forward on that? But I really wanted to begin and reiterate the significance of the content of the epic, even though the tale seems rather distant and remote from us. Yes, sir?
This part of the book right here, what page is that?
Oh, whatever. I don't know. It's line 105, so it's page 30. I got the line number there. It's book 1. So it's right early on. Immediately Mentor steps into his place. The father figure he has never had. And he needed that. He needed a father figure because he's a young man. If he'd been a daughter, then she would have had a mother to model for her, because Aristotle and basically every, again, traditional culture understands that we learn by imitation from those whom we admire and look up to. Like literally, if you're a child, you look up to your parents. But those are the people who are going to model character traits. We're going to pick them up. We're going to pick up expressions, inflections, poses. You always see children, they stand in a certain way, and the exact way that their parents do. They didn't even know they were modeling a way of doing things, and they find that they not only look like them, they act like them sometimes. And that's normal. And so what it's also going to be acquainting with us with, which I also want to identify for you, is that there is a model of human nature that the Greeks, the Romans, the Hebrews, and Christians, and every traditional culture believes for human nature, that is a fixed form that we are to emulate. It's not formless. It's not you can make up and be whoever you want to be. You can create of yourself whatever you want, as if you were just so much like clay and you can make yourself into something else. No, there's an ideal model of humanity that you are to measure up to. Now, for Christians, it's Jesus Christ, who's not only one of the gods, he is God. and took on human flesh, and everything that he did, everything that he said, however he acted, however he responded to those around him, is exemplary for us. His substitutionary atonement we can't replicate. But his human life is a model for us in how he did things, how he spoke to people. By the way, he wasn't nice to people all the time, especially the false teachers that we call the Pharisees. He called them hypocrites, actors. You act like you're righteous, but you're whitewashed sepulchres. That's not very nice. The Pharisees were not very happy with him. So he didn't go around embracing everyone, including everyone saying this is okay, this is not. He was clearly angered about false teaching and acted accordingly. And we'll find that the figure that represents wisdom in this book, not only Athena, but Odysseus himself, who represents wisdom, is going to prosecute and enact justice. He's going to punish the suitors for the injustice that's been brought into the kingdom of Ithaca. And I said, here's the trial that we're in. A just man has had as his reward not only exile, but his family and his kingdom disintegrating in front of everyone's eyes. And if that's the case, who would ever want to worship the gods again? That's exactly what we get in the Psalms as well. Why do the unrighteous flourish, seemingly, and the righteous seem to suffer and not get acknowledged? It's the age-old issue of the apparent injustice in the world. And the psalmist will say, don't worry, justice is coming, and it will not delay. Before that person's life is over, you will see justice. Not just sometime in the future. I mean, one day all injustices will be rectified in the second coming, when God will look at our lives and judge us but even in a person's own life, the injustices done will be addressed. And that's hopeful and encouraging. But it's a trial in the meantime. 20 years is a long time in a person's life. Yes, sir?
Just a question about this. When Athene steps in and disguises herself for Telemachus and later on for Odysseus,
Yeah.
do they eventually realize that it's Athena?
Nope. Not unless she reveals herself as such, which she does sometimes. But you'll notice that it's very common in the ancient world to regard this as a possibility for gods and angels. I mean, it's even said in the New Testament, sometimes people have been entertaining angels unaware, probably thinking of Abraham. But it was, and we'll find that Penelope, one of the reasons she doesn't believe that Odysseus is Odysseus later on, I'm sort of giving away the plot, when he stands in front of her, she says, no, I don't believe it's you. And he's furious. Like, I've endured 20 years away from you. I stand right in front of you, and you know who I am, and you don't believe me? I mean, I've given away that moment. I'm sorry I've done that, but he's just so outraged, all the suffering, and I come home, and this is the thanks I get. Like, I've just slaughtered all these sort of, and you don't believe that I'm your husband? No, you could be a god trying to trick me, trying to seduce me, get me into my bed, and there you go. You know what happens there. The gods are always doing this. There's another aspect to that story, so I'm not giving everything away. There's a better twist to that story. But what she's doing there is testing him. And this is exactly what Odysseus does. He questions what he sees. He doesn't trust it, just on the basis of appearances. And again, the Greek spirit of wisdom is in there. Do not trust what you see, because justice will not always be seen evidently in front of your eyes immediately. It may take a while for it to play out. But be sure that God's being just will do justice. But you need to be patient. So the ways of the gods, or the way of God, will require from us something that we're not very good at, including myself, which is to be patient and hopeful. And that is one thing that Odysseus is going to have to learn. So as wise as he is in the Trojan War, he's already renowned for wisdom, he's going to learn the patience that comes with suffering, which again is mentioned in 2 Corinthians. Along with suffering comes wisdom. Right? And God uses even the bad things in our lives for good purposes. And even Jesus himself, it says in the book of Hebrews, endured suffering, which is interesting since he's God. What can he learn through suffering? Well, he can learn as a human being to endure it. And learning it is not an easy thing. It's a different type of learning. Yes?
So I know that you were talking before about how they were kind of like rules for life and that sort of stuff, and that they were seen as models. Is that like, I know that some of the early psychological theoreticians like Jung were like, they use archetypes and that sort of stuff.
Yes.
You know, the Odyssey and things like that. Like, here are the models of, you know, how you should put yourself psychologically and, you know, different types of people and categorizations. Would the Greeks have seen it that way, or
No.
would they have seen it more like moral lessons and that sort of thing?
Yeah, great question, first of all. So Carl Jung and various psychologists have mined the great tradition for archetypes that they say remain valid for contemporary purposes. And it's not just Jung, Jordan Peterson, exactly the same thing. And he'll read the Bible the same way. He'll read it as archetypes and say that it's still of subjective benefit. So it's subjectively true on an individual basis that what is taught in Scripture or here in the Odyssey will also be applicable today and have some sort of value for you. That's the psychological term, and they will apply it subjectively, individually. What's being claimed in the Greeks and in every religious tradition, every traditional tradition, is that it's not just subjectively true, but it's objectively true. And there's where the dispute lies. It's particularly with respect to Christianity. But even with respect to Homer, again, some people thought, yeah, we can see why it's psychologically true, the events that happened to. We can see how wisdom and virtue are portrayed there, and that remains true for us. But did those events even ever happen? Well, yes, they did. The Battle of Troy did take place, etc. I alluded to that last time at the beginning of the class. But in terms of objective truth, they claim this was objectively true. The reason why Socrates ended up being killed for blaspheming the gods is because the Greeks said the gods are the gods, and it doesn't matter what your feelings about it. It's objectively true, and you must agree to that. And Socrates' point is that it can't be objectively true if they deny moral conduct in their context. Then they can't be the gods. He's making a philosophical point, right? But he's not denying that objective truth matters, and the psychologists think that objective truth is irrelevant, including Dr. Peterson, who I admire in many ways, but on this point he is totally out to lunch. Doesn't seem to understand that it's not just Jungian archetypes which we read and psychological significance of the scriptures, although they will speak to personal psychological matters, very much so. But it's objectively true for everyone. It has a normative claim. That's the issue that the Greeks are claiming, and Scripture is certainly claiming. There's another question before I move on. I want to move on because I'm going to do what I did last time. I'm going to spin my wheels for a long time. We're good? Okay, thank you. So